Sure, I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. My work is on language and cognition. So I study how the languages we speak shape the way we think. There are about 7,000 languages spoken around the world, and each one differs from the next in innumerable ways. Of course, languages have different sounds and they have different words, but they also differ in structure. And so research in my lab and many other labs around the world looks at how those differences in structure change the way the speakers think, see the world. Do speakers of Turkish and English and Spanish, when we look out at the world, do we see the same thing? Or do we see things slightly differently because of the structures of our languages?
So it's very, we know you. You are very famous. You have TED Talks and everything. So my question is, what do you think your research output is, affects education systems? Do you have some, advices to us? How this research, output affects the education in general?
Well, I'll tell you the things that I learned from the research, the things that inspire me the most. One thing is there are often things that we think are beyond our mental capacity or beyond our cognitive ability. Not because they actually are beyond our ability, just because we haven't tried or we haven't even thought to try. And so in some of my research, I look at people who can navigate really well. They speak languages that use cardinal direction terms like north, south, east, and west, and they stay oriented really well. And they do it better than we used to think humans could. And by we, I mean Western scientists studying usually American undergraduates that we call people, right? We would say,
there's a biased sample there, yeah?
Extremely biased, right? And so we would say, well, people can't do this. And then suddenly you find humans all around the world who do this thing that seems superhuman. And it's not even that it's impossible, it's not even that hard. You can just learn it to do it in a short period of time.
So they don't have the superpowers, huh?
Well, any mental ability could be a superpower. Learning to use numbers is a mental superpower. It opens up the world of mathematics, which builds the modern world. Right? A lot of our mental capacities are superpowers that are passed on in language. So for me, the thing that I learn most about that's relevant for education from my research is that our minds are capable of a lot more than we think they are. We often feel stuck in the little trenches that particular cultures and histories give us, but if we find ways to look outside and say, is there a way to do things differently? Often we're capable of much more than we can imagine.
So you think about the persistence. What do you think about being persistent in one thing? So because I think it comes with the its relation with the being successful on this thing.
Certainly, persistence is very useful in any endeavor, right? If you're trying to practice any kind of skill, and learning a language is definitely a skill, the more time you spend practicing it, the better. If you're trying to learn a new language, you have to go out and talk to people, you have to read, you have to do get as immersed as you possibly can in that language until you start thinking in that language and you start dreaming in that language. And all those hours of practice start to then feel natural and automatic. In the same way that for example, when you first start to drive a car, it may feel very stressful because you have to think in your mind, okay, do I shift now? Do I use the turn signal? What things do I do in what order? And after you've been doing it for a little while, you could drive to work and not even notice that you did it, right?
Yeah,
it just happens automatically. And so it's the same with any skill. The more practice you put in, the more automatic it is, the less attention it takes, and that means it frees up attention for doing lots of other things.
So the last question is about the learning language, because in Turkey in general we have the problem about to learn the second language to gain it in a proper way. So I know the persistence is important, but do you have anything special, concrete advices so how they can move on, how they can interact with the language so they can properly speak it?
Well, there's so many resources available now, right? There are apps like Duolingo and lots of others that people can use. Of course, you have to actually do it, right? Just the fact that it's in principle possible doesn't mean that people really do it. So, for example, both of my grandparents speak Yiddish, and I asked my grandma once, "Do you ever practice your Yiddish?" And she says, "Well, no, I don't have anyone to speak to." And I said, well, what about Grandpa? You live with Grandpa. He speaks Yiddish. And she says, well, Grandpa, what can you talk to him about? So it's important to actually want to be able to practice and do it, and find opportunities. And for me, the reason to learn another language is to connect with people, right? That's really the main reason to want to speak another language, is to be able to speak to larger groups of people. And so tap into whatever reason you have for wanting to learn that language. If you want to speak English, for example, you want to speak to other English speakers. Why? What do you want to talk to them about? Go and talk to them about those things. So connect the language learning to all of the interests that you already have.
So, if you think about the pandemic, with the social isolation and the social emotional deficiencies, so maybe learning a new language might have a really good opportunity for people now, so they can interact with more people and they can socialize more easily, huh?
I would certainly hope so. So because we're able to connect online more easily because of the technology that's been developed, in principle, it should be possible. The question is creating those channels and making those channels flow easily. So I had an experience recently. I was in Colombia learning Spanish, and I went to visit a classroom of students who were learning English, and so we were having a language exchange. And to them, it was very exotic to speak to someone who actually spoke English and had lived in an English-speaking country. And I thought, isn't this strange? Isn't this something that should have been fixed by now? Because there's so many people in the world who speak English, and there's so many people in the world who speak Spanish. Shouldn't this be just the easiest problem to solve? That I should be able to talk to lots of people who speak Spanish, and they should be able to talk to lots of people who speak English. And I think the technology that's being developed through the pandemic will help bring people together in that way, will help solve this weird problem that we have.
So, thank you very much for the interview. Thank you very much for your time.